Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, Ewan from What Culture Comics again, joined by Zoe.
I'm Zoe.
And today we're here to talk about one of the week's biggest releases and one of the year's biggest releases in general, House of X #1, because, oh boy, this is the comic that is promising massive, massive things for the X-Men, from going going all the way back to how we've kind of had the political fallout between Fox and Disney, and how, ostensibly the narrative was that CEO Ike Perlmutter was basically like, you can't use the Fantastic Four or X-Men in your comics anymore, give them a lesser role and try and replace them with the Inhumans, because we all know how good that worked out. And then basically now the X-Men are back. And this isn't a jab at any of the X-Men books that were released during that time. There are some amazing ones, particularly X-Men Red, which I really, really love. But for a while now, it has felt as though the X-Men weren't necessarily at the forefront of the Marvel Universe, but with Hickman coming on board, and yeah, I think having just read this today, it's well worth the hype. It's incredible.
We're really fresh off the presses with this one today.
Yeah. I literally came to the comic store this morning and was like, give me 10 comics of House of X. Not 10, because it costs £5, but still.
Well,
this book is absolutely amazing. I would encourage you to go read it yourself if you haven't, just in case you're wary of spoilers, because we will be diving into the intricacies of this, what is effectively a new status quo for Marvel's mutants. This book literally throws out the old rulebook and does its own thing. And it is just as exciting as when Hickman did it on Avengers.
I'd say more so. I'm genuinely more excited for this one, because the difference is he's managed to do essentially not exactly a reboot, but a fresh start that doesn't just get rid of all of the past history of the X-Men, because that was my biggest fear, that it'd be like, nothing's happened, so we'll have to do all the big events again. But it's, dare I say it, perfect.
It's incredible. I've read a lot of really, really good comics this year, like Jimmy Olsen, Lois Lane, Event Leviathan, Spider-Man Life Story continues to be amazing over on Marvel's end, and Daredevil too. But this might be my favorite thing I've read this year, because it takes a property that I have so much love for, but I've always found really impenetrable. I've always struggled to get into the X-Men. I've gone about this loads and loads and loads. So really, this, if you've ever loved the X-Men, if you've ever loved the 90s show, X-Men Evolution, which is my personal favorite, or basically the films as well, I feel as though if you've ever been put off by the sheer volume of content that Marvel have with the X-Men, all the interceding narratives, everything else, this is the comic for you, because it modernizes many different aspects of the characters. It promises a completely new story that you don't need any real prior context to really get into. All you need to know is that Professor X is here, Magneto's here, the classic X-Men that you've grown up with are all here too, in slightly different guises, because this is a whole new world that we've been introduced to here.
A more fashionable world.
A more fashionable world as well. But for those who are here for the nitty-gritty spoilers and the story, as it were, Marvel have kept basically all the major stuff under wraps until now. But yeah, basically this revolves around Professor X basically reuniting the mutants. I know literally the other month, Matthew Rosenberg killed everyone, but they're now back. There's a really interesting first shot where Professor X is effectively giving birth to the X-Men. It's framed as a slightly kind of uncomfortable moment, but it's
a bit of Freud in there.
but basically, they relocated to an island called Krakoa, which is located in the Pacific, and it's kind of like what Magneto did with Genosha, except instead of it being isolationist, there is a proactive nature to the foreign policy on display here, and there's a whole conversation here about identity as culture and identity as a nation and diasporas, and how that has influenced the Marvel mutant metaphor over the years. And I find that so fascinating, because basically, instead of practicing the old, the X-Men are superheroes, we're here to fight, humanity's battles, and that is our way of, kind of improving mutant-human relations, Professor X has turned around now and is adopting a more pragmatic approach, because on Krakoa, they have these flowers that basically have loads of incredible properties for both mutants and for humans. So mutants have flowers that can teleport them and different sort of things as well. And then for humans, basically what Xavier has done is he's basically taking over or infiltrated the pharmaceuticals market, and he's marketing these new flowers that can help humans live a further 5 years, cure brain diseases and stuff. And that is basically the way, saying we'll share this knowledge with you if you promise to leave us alone, basically. And Magneto leads the delegation to lead through the UN ambassadors to basically say, look, this is what we have, this is our own nation now, we've tried everything else, we'll give you this knowledge if you leave us alone. But of course, with humans being humans and being pesky, there are behind the scenes forces at play, and it's a really interesting mystery that is being built up right now.
I mean, my biggest hope for it is that I think a really interesting thing with it is that often so much of the X-Men is about them fighting each other, especially vis-a-vis Charles Xavier and Magneto, who are the most long-term rivals of most of comics. So I think it's really interesting to see them have this united front, and for it to finally not just be like about their sort of internal issues, but starting to focus on like how would the sort of political finesse of like just an island of superpowered people actually work.
Yeah, because literally the issue is stunning. By the way, Pepe Larraz, his work on this is incredible.
He did not mess about.
As is the colorist Marte Gracia. It's so incredible. And one of the most interesting things to me is that when you have a comic that introduces loads of different world building, it can be a little foreboding and disorienting. But they actually kind of divvy up the information in different ways. So you have the typical panel by panel structure with some phenomenal line art and some incredible colors on display, but then also they take the occasional pause to go through the different graphs and basically the makeup of this new world. So that is Krakoa on here. We'll take some pictures of the comic and overlay it with the footage soon. But they have loads of different moments like this intermingled throughout the comic that establishes the new organizations at play, different kind of Omega level mutants at play, and it's really, really interesting. And definitely, if you're reading it, don't skip over these because they provide such valuable context as to what's going on. And it's incredible. Before we kind of move on to the last little point about kind of the hopes of X-Men going forward, I need to talk about Cyclops in this book because there is an incredible interaction here, kind of going into lending itself to the idea of the X-Men as a diaspora, as a nation that's coming together now, and it involves a little tussle with the Fantastic Four. So basically Mystique, Toad, and Sabretooth are robbing Damage Control, and they are stealing data, and they basically get intercepted by the Fantastic Four. Now Mystique and Toad manage to make it out to Krakoa, but Sabretooth basically gets imprisoned by Sue Storm, and out comes Cyclops, and basically there's a little standoff there, a little bit of back and forth, because they are superheroes, they are friends, but then Cyclops is just there like, well, we'll be taking Sabretooth off you now. And Mr. Fantastic's there like, we have a problem. And it's there going into that idea of, amnesty. Can we rely on humans to deliver a fair trial for a mutant who suffers so much prejudice? That element is there too. And Cyclops basically takes the bigger man approach. He's like, well, you know what? You can have him. We'll deal with this in a different way some later down, a different time in the future. And there's an amazing, amazing line where he basically, after he's leaving, and Sue Storm is kind of being really anxious about what the X-Men are getting up to. He kind of, as he's walking back through the portal, he's just there like, tell your son Franklin that he's welcome to join us anytime he wants to, that he has a family waiting for him on Krakoa, and the idea of family, and I find that really, really compelling, and I'm excited to see the questions that get asked of it going forward.
I think it's such a smart thing because Cyclops can often be such a... Sorry to any Cyclops fans. He's not the most interesting dude, but he can be very beige.
He can be a bit of a dick.
So to have this sort of quasi-sassy but also quite authoritative Cyclops, especially because he emphasizes a really good point in that we see so many people hate mutants, but almost like a good 50% of the time, they are either related to or have been saved by a mutant at some point. Like, to see, again, this sort of political dynamism of like, oh, well, yeah, you don't trust us, but also... see your son? Oh yeah, your son. Yeah, your son can come.
It's definitely, obviously Cyclops has been more of a militant mutant for the past few years now.
To put it nicely.
But instead of him going on these, these firebrand tirades, it's a much more calm and measured takedown that he lays down on Mr. Fantastic here, and it was really gratifying to see. I was like, no, this is the reality. Here's how it is. You don't consider these, these questions of prejudice like you should, and this is why we do. This is why we're doing what we're doing, and it's really, really fascinating. And the issue ends with, Magneto basically laying down the same kind of talk and spiel about, the mutant culture, and the mutant nation, the mutant identity, to a few ambassadors who aren't as they would appear to be, and it ends with them opening up Krakoa and just showing you this amazing landscape, this amazing society, and I'm so excited to see how this develops.
Well, I think, I was just thinking about it as you said it, one of the cleverest things they do with this sort of blend between the comic and like informing you of the actual universe is that at no point does it suffer from this thing that a lot of reboot comics do, where it's just like pages of dialogue, like monologues for days. I think they've done such a clever sort of framing of it in a way that makes you think about it, but also you don't necessarily have to read like an entire diatribe of Magneto being like, when I was born.
When I was born and I lived through World War II. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And this is the best thing about it. I would definitely emphasize, if you have ever been kind of unsure about getting into comics and you are familiar with the X-Men even just a little bit, I would definitely encourage you to try reading this. It's very easy to get to. If you go to your local comic shop, they'll explain how it goes. House of X and it's a House of 10 and Powers of 10. I've already messed this up. I called it House of X about 55 times.
You can call it that.
But House of 10 and Powers of 10 release concurrently, so they release each week. So we've got Powers of 10 coming out next week, and those stories will basically intermingle and then conclude in October with the release of X-Men #1, and that'll be basically what you need that's all the resource you'll need to get into this new status quo. But yeah, very, very exciting. This is definitely an amazing future that Marvel have planned for their mutants, and it's just great to see them back at the forefront of this universe like they should be, really.
I mean, I talked a big game about DC having a new timeline, but I'm arguably more excited for Marvel's now, because you could literally just read House of 10 and Power of 10, and suddenly you actually know the X-Men, so I mean, even if you hate the X-Men and you just want a cheeky catch-up,
yeah,
do about 10 issues, you're in.
Exactly. But yeah, I want to know what you all thought of House of 10 if you read it down in the comments below, and let us know if you're interested in picking it up now if you weren't already before. And as always, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and head back on over to whatculture.com/comics. We'll have more House of 10 and Hickman X-Men coverage in the weeks to come. As always, I've been Ewan. You can follow me on Twitter @EwanRunesThings, where I'll probably just be gushing over the X-Men for the next few weeks, because that's how it is. And I've been joined by Zoe.
That was questionable phrasing.
It was.
But I've been Zoe, and you can find me at Zemmascal.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.